Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this CSIS online event on leveraging digital technologies to empower women. My name is Romina Bandura, and I'm a senior fellow at the Project on Prosperity and Development here at CSIS. I'll be moderating this session today. At CSIS, we have partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a year-long research and outreach project on digital transformation, in particularly looking at how digital public infrastructure can expand economic growth and women's economic empowerment in developing countries. This is the third event of our series. As you know, digital transformation is accelerating worldwide. You need a physical infrastructure layer, a digital public infrastructure layer, and an apps layer to provide digital services. What is a digital public infrastructure? Essentially, it's the enabling system that allows digital services to be provided to citizens and the private sector, and it's composed of digital identity systems, electronic payments, and a data exchange system. And DPI, for its acronym, has become more prominent in the international agenda. For example, last year in September 2023, the UN Secretary General selected digital public infrastructure as one of the 12 high impact initiatives that has the potential to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there were commitments to DPI from 100 countries. Moreover, last year, the G20 under its India presidency has championed, digitization and in particularly DPI. Today, we have two great panelists that will talk about how their organizations are approaching women's economic empowerment, and in particular, the role of digital technologies and DPI within this topic. Jamilia Bihio serves as Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in the Office of the Administrator of USAID. Ms. Bihio has a distinguished career in gender issues. She served as a senior fellow on women and foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. She was also the director for human rights and gender on the White House National Security Council. And Jamila has also worked at the US State Department and United Nations. Welcome, Jamila, to the conversation. We also have Jamie Zimmerman, who is the Deputy Director of Digital Connectivity at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Jamie leads the foundation's work to accelerate the closure of the gender digital divide and enhance meaningful digital connectivity to improve the lives and livelihoods of women and girls. Before her role at Gates, Jamie spent several years as a senior consultant and advisor to several international organizations, including the United Nations, the World Food Program, and the World Bank. So welcome, Jamie, as well. Before we start the conversation, I'd like each of you a little bit to introduce, I did a snapshot of your bio, but I'd like you to tell us a little bit, to describe your role and, what you're doing at USAID and at Gates respectively. So maybe I'll start with Jamila. Jamila, the floor is yours.
Wonderful, thank you. And such a pleasure to be with you, Romina, CSIS. Thanks so much for hosting this conversation. And thrilled that your focus on DPI includes attention to how our DPI priorities, commitments relate to our commitments for gender equality around the world and ensuring equal access, meaningful connectivity around the world for all. to your question, my name's Jamila, as you noted, with my hat serving as the Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment at USAID. I sit in the office of our administrator, Samantha Power, to work across all of USAID, so all of our 80 plus missions around the world that are working to advance sustainable development in partnership with local communities, with governments, with private sector partners, all together looking to achieve our collective goals of ending poverty, advancing health, education, economic opportunities, and together achieving sustainable development outcomes. We know at USAID that the research has proven that to achieve those goals, we need to advance gender equality. We will not achieve those goals without also having gender equality in society and addressing the barriers that prevent all women and girls, men and boys, gender diverse individuals from being able to fully access and control resources, opportunities, to be able to live free from violence, and to be able to fully participate in society. With my hat at USAID, we have, over the last few years, identified how we are taking the US government's US national strategy on gender equity and equality forward. So we've set out a new policy, a new vision for the agency of how we can achieve these goals, drawing on our resources. And as part of that, we've made a commitment to more than double our investment in gender equality and women's empowerment around the world. And White House announced this, and this became real in our last year's budget, and we're continuing to increase that. And it is not a separate investment. It is an investment, as we noted, recognizing that by investing more in gender equality, we will advance our goals of economic growth. We will advance our goals of food security. We will advance our goals of addressing, responding to climate change. And so that's a piece that we here at USAID, and what my role entails, is helping to mobilize that investment and provide the tools and support to strategically and meaningfully invest in gender equality around the world. Our focus today on digital public infrastructure, digital transformation is a prime example of, as we have that conversation, we need to be looking at who has access and who doesn't, and what steps we need to take to make sure that gender is not a barrier to meaningful connectivity around the world.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm going to now turn to Jamie, and I'm going to ask you the same, question. Can you just briefly describe your role and the work you do at Gates Foundation?
Sure, thanks, and hi, everybody. Good early morning from the West Coast here in Seattle. Great to be with you, Romina, and the CSIS team, and always lovely to be in conversation with Jamila. Jamie and Jamila talk gender digital divide. Sounds like we could maybe start our own podcast there. But yeah, as Jamila said, that women's power equals economic power, and not just at the micro level, that's at the macro level too. And so, this is something that is a central focus of the Gates Foundation, ensuring that we achieve gender equality so that all people are equally valued and have an equal opportunity to learn, contribute, and thrive. And those are all people, but all societies and all economies too. And so that's kind of an approach and mindset that we take, and why we elevated gender equality a few years ago from a small strategy team at the foundation to a full division. So Jamie Zimmerman, thanks for introducing me earlier, Romina. And before those years of consulting, before joining the foundation, I also have spent many years in the think tank community in Washington, D.C. as well. So feel like I'm amongst cousins and friends. So it's nice to be in this conversation and in community back with the DC crew. So I joined the foundation in 2017, not in the gender equality space, but actually in the digital space, working very integrated with our what we now call our inclusive financial systems team, where a lot of our focus within the foundation on digital public infrastructure first was fomented and grew. So digital payments, digital ID, some of the digital data layers that we often consider the digital public infrastructure kind of stack, so to speak, were anchored and continue to be anchored in large part within that team. And during my years on that team, we made a commitment to ensure that the work we were doing to build inclusive financial systems were equally reaching women. And so I took on a portfolio that still exists within that team on women's financial inclusion and economic empowerment. And say that to say that the need for inclusive digital public infrastructure and digital tools and platforms is so fundamental to being able to achieve multiple goals, not just for financial systems, but for what we're trying to achieve at the foundation in agricultural development, what we're trying to create at the foundation in women's access to capital and markets, or to equal access to health systems. And so, within my years within the inclusive financial systems teams working on the gender equality portfolio there, one of the things that we discovered and decided that you needed to really think about more deeply is the foundational gender digital divide and the role that it plays in kind of setting the stage for whether things like digital public infrastructure are going to be able to meaningfully connect women, and that women are going to be able to meaningfully onboard to it and use it in ways that are most useful to their lives. So when the Gender Equality Division was stood up a couple of years ago, we decided to make closing the gender digital divide an essential part of the Gender Equality Division's work to advance women's economic power. And that only happens in close collaboration with other teams at the foundation and with external partners. More recently, we've also stood up a digital public infrastructure team, a team that I work very, very closely with. So what we're trying to do within this new digital connectivity work that I lead at the foundation within the Gender Equality Division is work to understand and address the core gender-specific barriers that are preventing women from participating fully and thriving in the digital economy and in increasingly digitally transformed societies. So that's the evolution of the foundation's work on digital connectivity for women and girls, and how it relates to some of the other increasingly digital work that we do across the foundation and other teams.
Thank you, Jamie. And I say, that digital has become, like a utility, like water or electricity. And, if half of the population of the world don't have access, being women, we've got a big problem. So I thank you for the, for the description. And so going back a little bit to, what Jamila was saying about the gender policy. Jamila, I want to turn to you and ask you a little bit about how USAID's works with State Department and with, I know you have the Gender Policy Council. And so can you a little bit describe how, you have, I think your new gender equality, well, new, it's from 2023, Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Policy. Can you describe a little bit how you approach, economic empowerment for women, and how that relates to what other branches and agencies in the government are doing?
Happy to, yes. So in 2021, the U.S. government issued our first ever national gender equity and equality strategy. This was put out by the White House, by the president and vice president, laying out a vision of how the U.S. government will advance the full participation of all people, including women and girls, in the United States and around the world. So this strategy looks at what are the barriers and opportunities for full participation of all people, including women and girls, both here in the United States and around the world. It looks at 10 priorities, from economic security to gender-based violence, health and education, to climate change, technology and science, democracy and leadership, and so on. And that provides an overarching framework that is guiding the U.S. government strategy, both domestically and around the world, around gender equality. We then took that overarching strategy and have detailed a more specific vision in different sectors. So the U.S. government then launched our first ever U.S. strategy for women's economic security globally. And this is an interagency strategy. So to your question of how are we working with others, this strategy outlines how 12 departments and agencies across the government, from USAID and state to Commerce and Labor and Treasury, Health and Human Services, Millennium Challenge Corporation, and so on, how we are collectively using the different tools, investments, diplomatic engagement, and other opportunities we have to collectively help make progress on this area that is so critical for gender equality globally, and that is women's economic security specifically. So this strategy then lays out a vision of how we are helping around the world to unlock better access to well-paying quality jobs for women. We identify a second priority of advancing care infrastructure and valuing domestic work, both recognizing care infrastructure as a key element for women's ability to participate in society, and then recognizing domestic work is an area where women are disproportionately represented around the world, and how are we valuing that work more. Our third priority, which connects squarely with today's conversation, is looking at promoting entrepreneurship, financial and digital inclusion, and trade and investment. And so recognizing that that digital inclusion, financial and digital inclusion are essential elements to women's economic security around the world. And then our fourth line of effort focuses on dismantling systemic barriers to women's participation. And here we recognize that in order to advance women's economic security, we need to look at where there are legal barriers, for example, that are holding them back, where they do not have access to land or other resources that are essential to full economic participation. So this strategy then laid out that vision, and we are taking this forward. Each of the 12 departments and agencies at USAID, we're taking it forward through a few collective initiatives that we have launched. So we have, between USAID and state, we have the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund, which is focused specifically on women's economic security. And through this fund, we have together, in just the first year, we have supported activities in over 60 countries. We have supported over 3,000 women-owned micro enterprises to access loans, bank accounts, and other services. We've provided over 64,000 women with legally recognized, documented tenure rights to land or marine areas, and overall reached more than 500,000 people. with this goal of advancing women's economic security. The Vice President has launched a few initiatives focused on women's economic security, one of which is one that we are thrilled to partner with the Gates Foundation on, and this is the Women in the Digital Economy Fund, and a broader initiative that brings more partners to the table. And this is our collective effort to accelerate progress in closing the gender digital divide together, scaling up proven solutions to making progress, while supporting the private sector to do their part, and supporting local women-led organizations and businesses to ensure that the solutions that are being advanced are the effective ones, being informed by women leaders on the ground, advancing solutions in their communities. And I'll just note the other two initiatives quickly as we kind of round out what's our focus on women's economic security around the world. The second initiative is Women in the Sustainable Economy, and this is focused on ensuring women have access to the jobs of the future and the industries of the future, as we look at just transitions around the world, and recognizing that green and blue industries are essential ones, and we need to ensure women have access to jobs in these sectors, which are often have been historically male-dominated ones, such as energy and utilities, as well as that women entrepreneurs have access to climate finance to advance their climate-related economic businesses and solutions. Then the third investment is a partnership with the World Bank, the Invest in Childcare Initiative, recognizing that for women to be able to work, for families to succeed economically, families need access to childcare, in addition to elder care, sick care, and other care infrastructure and investments. But that initiative is focused specifically on expanding access to childcare in low and middle income countries around the world. So together, this is our kind of flagship focus investment area, enhancing care infrastructure, closing the gender digital divide, and promoting women in the sustainable economy.
Wonderful. I'll now turn a little bit to Jamie, and I know you you described your role in the foundation's work, very eloquently. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the Gates Foundation is approaching, digital transformation? I know that you have you look at financial services for the poor. You have, obviously gender empowerment is a big component, but you also have other sectors where you're looking at, health, I think food systems. So how are you, if you could just add on to what you mentioned at the beginning?
Yeah, sure thing. And I think it's really interesting actually to share this, something that we've been looking at and internally to try to understand kind of what is our approach to digital transformation, and not just where does it sit within specific strategy teams, as we call them, like mine, or like the inclusive financial systems team, or the DPI team, or a new team that we have that's focused on artificial intelligence and how we use that to also accelerate innovation towards the outcomes that we're trying to achieve across the teams. But one of the things that we did when we that my team, as well as the team that is now known as the DPI team, did when we first started exploring setting up these teams in this work, was to do a pretty deep landscaping of where digital exists across the foundation, which of our many, I think we have close to 30 different program strategy teams that make up the almost $9 billion in annual grant making and investments that we have across the foundation, and wanted to see how our teams using digital tools, leveraging digital infrastructure, building digital platforms, digitizing the systems in which we work and are trying to support our partners to affect change. And that landscaping that we did revealed that we have, even though it's among that almost $9 billion, the direct investment that we have in digital transformation is a relatively small piece of it. It's one of our fastest growing areas of work within the variety of teams at the foundation. And so I share that to say that it's become increasingly clear to me, and I think others within the leadership within the foundation, that digital infrastructure platforms and tools are vital to helping people access health services, education opportunities, income generating opportunities, participating in their communities and economies. And so you see different approaches to how we might partner with digitally focused organizations and private sector firms, or how we might support governments who are trying to accelerate digital transformation in inclusive ways, and how we might do that across a number of different teams. But the work is there, trying to look at what we can do to leverage these tools to accelerate impact and change in the outcomes. And I think this is something we're looking at the trends. We're looking at trends not just in gender equality, but in a lot of different sustainable development goals. And we see that digital can be a really incredible tool. I don't usually like to use the word leapfrogging and be too techno-optimist, but I know it is a tool, a term that is used. But I also see, when we look at the backsliding that is happening in a number of different metrics of progress, that it's we can either intentionally use it to accelerate the pace of change, or there's a risk that we see that these tools will actually grow different divides and could exacerbate different challenges. And so we really want to be thoughtful and smart about how we leverage the tools for health goals and for our development goals, and for women's economic power in particular. So just to say, across the foundation, this is something that I think you mentioned, Romina, that you are focused within CSIS largely on digital public infrastructure. I think that this has become a very prescient goal for us to ensure that the infrastructure is going to be there, the foundations will be there that are set up to be inclusive, and that we could be leveraging and utilizing to ensure that all the rest of those different types of health and ag and water and sanitation and water and sanitation systems, et cetera, are there, and we're going to be able to build on those and leverage them for getting better, higher quality products and services and systems to those who need it. So I think that that's something that we're incredibly focused on, and then on the gender equality side, it's to say, okay, you build that infrastructure, but it is not a given that just because the infrastructure is there, that it is going to be equally meaningful, accessible, and useful to all people who we would hope that it could reach. And so, that is something that, when the work that Jamila mentioned, is one of our flagship partnerships that has kicked off in the last year. The Women in the Digital Economy Fund is looking specifically at that issue and saying, okay, what are some of those barriers to access, barriers to affordability, the existence of relevant products and tools that work for women where they are in their needs, within their contexts, and then are they safe and secure, and are we thinking about issues of technology facilitated gender-based violence, which we know is on the rise, and as we bring women in to participate in the digital world, that we want them to have an equal and unbiased experience, and hopefully a safe experience when they're doing it too. And then so also just tackling some of the normative issues. So looking across that gamut of supply and demand side issues and things that are gender specific barriers, so that as that infrastructure is getting stood up, we're able to leverage it to close quickly the gaps instead of assuming that we're going to have some trickle down digital connectivity for women and girls, which we are pretty confident won't work. So that's kind of a lay of the land, like how it looks right now. I would suspect that over the coming years, we're going to see the work pick up across the foundation teams on as the DPI infrastructure types of layers do get put into place within various countries. We're going to see a lot more work to support the ecosystems of partners within different countries and regions to make sure that those are inclusive and equally accessible to all.
Thank you, Jamie. You both mentioned barriers for women, and in particularly in digital technologies, and you also I think Jamila said systemic barriers, but more on the on women in the economy and in general. And you also mentioned opportunities for women in the digital space. I wanted to throw a question to both of you. What do you think are the most significant barriers that women face in regards to digital transformation, and in particularly DPI? I was really astonished, when we started this work about 5 years ago, to learn that 1 billion people in the world don't más o menos don't have an identity. So which and most of those women, most of those people are women. So without an identity, you can't transact or get a job, or a formal job at least, or buy a cell phone. So that really was really an astonishing piece of data that we didn't know, or it wasn't highlighted as much. So what do you think are some, in your work, what are some of the barriers that you see with women and digital technologies? And maybe Jamila, you can start. Yes.
Yeah, I'll kick us off, and
okay,
Jamila, you add. So I'm already off mute. So I think the foundational issue of a foundational ID, Romina, is absolutely one of the most critical elements. To have a digital ID, you also need to have typically some form of access to a mobile phone and mobile internet, and a way to be able to use that digital ID for the services that you need, which sometimes requires biometric authentication at a service point, which means that you also need mobility and private, and you might have different mobility constraints and privacy constraints than others who are also being provided with the foundational ID. However, at the same time, having that ID is the critical piece of being able to get a SIM card, to be able to register you're a small and medium-sized enterprise or any sort of other business, and have that, and be able to access any type of other social supports, whether those are government-to-person payments, or we saw this with the fallout around COVID and the economic response to COVID. It was largely the small businesses that needed relief were those that were formal businesses, but a vast majority of small businesses in low-income countries that are led by women, and a lot of them are informal, and so did not get the same level of access to relief payments as so many others. I think also we talk a lot about the mobile phone and access to the mobile phone. I think we talk a lot less about access to mobile internet and the cost of data.
Yeah.
We're seeing lots of efforts to try to subsidize or have smart financing models to get a smartphone in particular, because we know women, you can get access to a feature phone potentially without that digital ID, but to get a smartphone, you're going to need to have that set up and registered usually in some way, and ideally you want that phone owned by a woman in her hand over which she has decision-making control in some agency. But we see where we see gender gaps for sure in mobile phone ownership, and those gender gaps are indeed widening very sadly over the last couple of years. They pale in comparison to mobile internet gender gaps. So for instance, in South Asia, where there's a 15% gender gap in mobile ownership, it's a 41% gender gap in mobile internet. And so, we want the systems to be in place for women to be able to, now you have a digital ID, you can go online and get these services. Can they get can they go on? Do they have the data? Are they able to afford it? And the affordability gap is significant because the pay gap is significant. And so the trade-off and opportunity cost of affording paying for mobile internet in many contexts is quite high for women who have potentially a little less spending power, a little less control over the resources within their household, et cetera. And so figuring out that mobile internet affordability gap, I think is pretty critical if we want women to be able to equally leverage the power of digital public infrastructure and everything that is going to be on that infrastructure. And if the expectation is that increasingly everything is on that infrastructure and there's no physical option, how are we going to address the fact that it's going to be, until these other gaps are closed, a bit harder for women to optimize their experience on within that infrastructure. So I think the mobile internet gap is an important one. I also think a couple of others is just digital, what we're starting to call less digital literacy and more digital fluency. And just feeling that level of comfort in using digital tools and engaging in digital life. And so women are 29% less likely to be digitally literate than men in low-income countries. That's an average number. You look across different regions and geographies, the numbers vary widely, but also more strikingly, 59% of women feel unsafe using the internet in low-income countries. And there are many reasons for that, and we can get into it. But I think that if we want there to be kind of equal benefit from digital engagement and all the things that we have access to in digitally transformed societies, the digital tools need to be in women's control, in their hands, and they also need to feel like these are spaces where they can and will be able to confidently take advantage of for whatever purposes that they choose. And so these are things that I think, we will have like inclusive infrastructure in place, but if we don't address some of these other underlying barriers, we're going to see these spaces be beneficial for women, but not nearly as beneficial and easy to access as they will be for men. And then, other intersections of, low income women in rural settings and low infrastructure environments. Now we're talking like pretty huge gaps. So those are some of the things, like lots of opportunity, but we got to address those different elements across I guess the kind of demand side and ecosystem to make sure it works for women. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Jamila, do you want to add about, what barriers you see at USAID, from the USAID perspective? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll just reinforce some pieces that Jamie highlighted, which I think are so critical to a DPI conversation and effort. So first, to reinforce that our goal is, looking at how digital public infrastructure can help build more inclusive economies. That is not going to happen just through the technology itself. We need to take additional steps beyond the software, hardware, the digital public infrastructure itself. We need to take additional steps to help ensure that the appropriate legislative, regulatory policy support is there, that we have the community engagement with civil society, with the private sector, with other actors who are providing both oversight and input into how technology is used and what values are being prioritized through those investments. The next piece is then looking at then let's talk about it. How is the technology being used? How are we using DPI? So there's the data exchanges, data governance, right? Looking at the tremendous amount of data available on citizens, on organizations that can be used to improve delivery of government services. They can be used to improve planning and budget allocations, performance oversight, and so on. We need to ensure that when that data is being used, that it is being broken out by gender identity, by income, by age, by location, by other factors, so that we are actually therefore able to identify what communities are being underserved, where are there the greatest challenges in that need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And so using that data to really help ensure that, again, the policies, the legislative, regulatory steps, et cetera, are and broader investments are informed by that broader analysis. Jamie talked about how critical digital IDs are, and that's such a prime example of a gender gap that, if not closed, then inequities would grow. And so here we, Romina, you talked about kind of the global data on, those who lack digital IDs and recognizing that that's disproportionately women. When you break that out by country, then you also have a call to action, looking mm-hmm. at, where you see significant gender gaps in who has a digital ID in countries around the world. There's data across where you've got, from, Ethiopia, where there's nearly a 20% gender gap and who has digital IDs, to Pakistan, where you've got a 14% data gap, to, Niger with a 25% data. So across, we've got these really important gender gaps in who has access to digital IDs, that if we don't close that, then all the services that come from having a digital ID that Jamie spoke about, women and girls will have less access to those, will continue to not have access to those services. And therefore, the inequities that exist by not having access to government support, or to cell phones, or to other opportunities, social protection, education, these will not be available, and inequities in societies will grow from that. We also are looking at digital payments, and the opportunity that's available to women. They stand to gain an immense amount from the digitization of payments, where they have mobility constraints due to safety concerns or social norms. They can access financial services for home, where they have opportunity costs of not having the time sufficient to access traditional financial services. As we know, looking at time use data, how much time women are spending on child or elder care, other home responsibilities, in addition to their economic responsibilities or economic opportunities. So that opportunity cost is significant. We know that discrimination, that gender-based discrimination that women face in accessing financial services. There's opportunity for digital financial services to help mitigate human bias that's introduced, for example, in credit decisions. We know the benefits of security, of not needing to carry cash, the speed of transfers, et cetera. All of these are significant. And as we accelerate them, as we accelerate the infrastructure enabling the digitization of payments, we need to ask these questions and take the additional steps that we're talking about here to help ensure that women and girls have equal access to digital IDs, that they have equal access to both mobile phones and mobile internet and data, as Jamie was noting, that they have equal access to the infrastructure that is being expanded And if not, then we will not achieve our goals of inclusive economies, and we will not see the kind of economic growth that we know is possible when women can fully participate in the economy as well.
Thank you for that. I want to go back, Jamila. You mentioned a little bit about, women's economic opportunities at the beginning and the, jobs of the future. We also know that women are, heavily represented, I would say, as informal workers. So most of the informal jobs are held by women, that being in, agriculture or services. In what ways can, digital technologies and DPI in particularly unlock opportunities for women in the informal economy and, improve these economic opportunities? And that's a question for both of you, Jamie and Jamila.
So I
go first this time, Jamila.
Okay, I'll go first this time. So there is immense potential for participation in the digital economy to help both accelerate women's economic potential in informal economies. So how successful are they in the informal economy itself, as well as then set them up to be able to shift into the formal economy with the additional protections, legal protections, and other benefits that are offered by participating in the formal economy. So we see this, for example, with women-owned enterprises, women-owned businesses that can be, micro enterprises, right? Very small-scale efforts. By gaining access to information, right? So we know this for farmers, for example, women farmers. Do they have information about prices to set their goods? Do they have information about weather and other risks? Do they have information to inform decisions that they make about what they're growing, how they're growing it, where they're selling it, how they're selling it? That kind of information that they can get through mobile internet access will then help them expand what might be just subsistence farming with some, small selling into something that is a more substantial business. We are just launching USAID, in fact, a focus on a report on what works to increase women's agricultural income. So encourage all to look at that, and certainly digital investments are one important way to help increase women's agriculture income. That's just one sector as an example, but you can carry that through to other examples where women are producing goods that they are trying to source inputs for, and then are trying to sell on. Being able to do that on the internet, both of those, in the digital economy is where they're going to see broader, bigger markets that will help them grow. And as they grow those businesses, they are then able to hire more people to work for them. Often they are hiring other women as well within their networks to focus on lifting up other women economically, and the benefits that those have for their families and communities. I'll make one other note and then pass to Jamie, which is also the importance of information on legal rights, on policy commitments that can inform women's advocacy as well. And so we've seen this. We have an activity in Ghana, for example, that's focusing on investing in women's agricultural platforms that with information about commitments that have been made by the government around access to inputs like fertilizer and seeds, women are then going out and advocating and knowing what to seek in terms of public investment and opportunities in what they're growing. But civic platforms can grow digitally. They grow through that opportunity for exchange. They grow through that access to information that digital inclusion enables.
So, Jamie, I'd like you to react to this because I know digital tools can, obviously improve economic opportunities for women, and both in the in the informal sector, and then as Jamila said, improve their transition to the formal sector. But you also mentioned that women are unsafe using the internet and maybe digital too. So can you talk about obviously the opportunities, but also double down on this unsafe using the internet that you mentioned?
Yep. And so and just to clarify that women feel more unsafe, and there is a higher prevalence of there is technology facilitated gender-based violence, and there is bias and discrimination and in the system. But I don't want to say anything that I think would be perceived as women should not engage online because it is not a safe place for them. It is the duty of those who are building and regulating these spaces to ensure that they're safe spaces for everyone. And so just to say that, but absolutely. So what Jamila was talking about, which I really appreciated, was the ability for digital infrastructure to close information asymmetries. And so those are information asymmetries that maybe the women that work in the informal sector have, but they're also information asymmetries that in the private sector and with the government, where we now can have visibility into things that are happening online, good or bad. Women's, with digital ID and digital payments, we can now both register, make an informal business formal. We can also track and know, the more about business operations and payments history and growth of and kind of the operations of the business over time, which can close an information asymmetry that is historically meant higher credit, higher interest rates on credit for women business owners. And so, I think that one of the upsides of having more access to information within the different kind of ID payments and data exchange platforms is the ability to increase access to and lower cost of capital. So credit for women, but also access to assets. So not just the debt side of it, but other types of assets like land titling and other types of assets that women would want to leverage and grow. And those could then increase access to markets. I think that on the safety and security side, having more information about how women and those who are also in some ways regulating their lives online, their communities, potentially their families, having information about what is the actual prevalence of online gender-based violence, of discrimination that is perpetrated at kind of the digital touch point, things that are the biases that are encoded into the systems and algorithms that we're using in order to make things like credit decisions and decide kind of what women see and are given access to online. All those things are things that we need to understand better. We need to we know that there's an issue. We don't know necessarily all the depths of that issue. We also don't know all the different ways to solve for that issue, which is something where we are very committed to understanding and exploring. So I think that the overarching takeaway is that the ability for women to be able to access DPI and for that DPI to close information asymmetries, that's going to lead to more access to assets, capital, and markets for women, which lead to more income, more time, more control, and hence more economic security and power, is like the overarching issue. The issues of bias and GBV and other types of issues and discriminatory challenges are very prevalent, and things that we also need to be using these sex disaggregated data and the policy and regulatory levers that Jamila mentioned to help to understand and to address, but I wouldn't want to have my words misunderstood to say like, let's slow down in a place where we actually need to really ensure that women are able to take advantage of all the benefits that are there.
Yep. Thank you. And you both mentioned collaboration as key. A lot of the initiatives that you mentioned are, collaborative initiative between philanthropies, development agencies, private sectors, and civil society. The United States has, very strong institutions, both in the philanthropic world, in the development agencies. We've got great development agencies. We have strong NGOs doing work on this space. We've got great companies. So what would you like to see like in the future in terms of collaborations for digital transformation, and in particularly DPI as it concerns women? What are some gaps? What do you think the future brings? And I'll start with you, Jamila, and then Jamie.
Well, we in fact have an initiative with open arms that we are welcoming partners to join us in, the Women in the Digital Economy Initiative. And this is meant to be a community of practice, a place to expand partnerships to together accelerate progress in closing the gender digital divide, including with a focus on digital public infrastructure, as we're discussing today. And here, I think the data is clear. We know that the gender divides exist, but they are not closing at the rate in which they need to. And we know the implications of that, of what will happen to expand inequities and inequalities in society because of it. So we know it's a critical issue to focus on. We have a lot of experience together across governments, foundations, corporations, civil society, who have been working on different parts of this issue over the last many years, and have experience of what works, what doesn't, that can help guide us so that our strategies to help close these divides are informed by what works, is scaling what works, and looking together to learn more about where we need more collective lessons to help advance that progress. We know, depending on the gender digital gap and priority being addressed, different partners need to be at the table. So we know to see the scale that we want to see in ensuring that women are full and equal participants in digital ecosystems, and therefore are full and equal participants in societies at large, that for which digital is a key utility. Then we know that we need to make collective commitments together. Mm-hmm. So we very much invite all to join us. We are going to be hosting a meeting of the initiative's community of practice next week. The fund that USAID and Gates jointly have jointly launched, the Women in the Digital Economy Fund. It was announced by Vice President Harris last year. We are formally launching it next week at the Commission on the Status of Women. So encourage all to tune in as we kick off that work, and make a collective call to action for us all to really lift up and drive progress here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamila. Jamie?
Great. And with just a minute left to go,
yes.
I'll just say everything that Jamila just said. I mean, there's a reason why it sounds like we are marching in lockstep in so many ways in this conversation, is because we absolutely are. And the Women in the Digital Economy Fund, as I mentioned, is a flagship initiative for the digital connectivity work within the foundation. And so all I'll just say is doubling down on what Jamila said, all hands on deck, moment. And this is our way of building a space where those hands can get on deck together and we can all start rowing in the same direction. It's a complex issue. It's going to require infrastructure. It's going to require investment. It's going to require policy. It's going to require innovation in products and services and tools, and connection and collaboration across multiple sectors and multiple different types of stakeholders within a very complex, fast-moving world. So let's focus on what works. Let's scale it, and let's all like lean our proverbial shoulders in and like shoot for that North Star.
Well, thank you, ladies. I know we're out of time. I have 5 more questions for you. We could go on forever, but I'm mindful of the time. And thank you for the audience that has been watching us. And with that, I close the event. And please look at CSIS for future events on digital public infrastructure in the future.